I need Scantrons. You must give me your Scantron before the exam, all right? That means in my office by tomorrow, I'm not, hey, Bronchi, here's my Scantron, right, as I'm coming to class. Okay. For the exam, if I'm not there, just slide it under the door. I will put your name on it, and I will put a name on it. You're not going to get yours. And this is just done to make sure that everybody who's writing things are writing their own things. Okay? All right. So, as we're heading into the last portion of the semester, be aware that I am not using eCampus for grades anymore because I've discovered that there's some problem, tabulation of points, and I'm using an Excel spreadsheet. So if you want to see that, come see me during my office hours. All right? So let's pick up where we left off. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is going to be created in 1949, and it has a very specific purpose. It is designed to be a league of nations, if you will, pardon the use of that phrase, to link all of its members together in an agreement that if one is attacked by Russia, all of them will respond. Original members are Canada, United States, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, France, the UK, Portugal, Italy, Norway, Denmark, and Iceland. Those are the original 14. It has since expanded and now includes Germany. It now also includes Poland. These are all things that are going to be added later as it adapts from being a Cold War device to a modern day organization. So it is created to stand against Russia. Because what happened? Remember, when Germany attacked Poland, not much happened. When England declared war, but not everybody surrounding there declared war. So this is created to prevent something like that from happening again. Uh-oh. I was not liking it. It's always good. Stand against Russia, yes.
Maybe you should try touching the screen. Maybe that'll help.
Yeah, I'm going to touch the screen, yes. So, one of the major things that we learned from World War II is that our bureaucracy that dealt with our military and some of our more secret-based organizations were not up to the task of adequately defending the United States. As a result, we're going to take from those experiences and modify them. In 1947, the National Security Act is passed. This changes how we have the Army and the Army Air Force, which was a branch of the Army, into the Army and the Air Force, to be the four branches of the military that we have today, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine. Also places them all under one cabinet-level position, the Department of Defense. It replaces the Department of War, Department of Defense. Now, during World War II, something that we have not really talked much about is our spy agencies. We had a spy agency that was known as the Office of Strategic Services. It was known as the OSS. It is going to be redefined in the National Security Act of 47 and become the Central Intelligence Agency, our chief spook network, if you will, our spy network that we have today. The CIA is responsible with dealing with human intelligence threats from overseas. Nothing that comes internally. That is the FBI's domain. Now, in addition to that, at 49, we passed the Selective Service Act. This Selective Service, it requires all males over the age of 18 to file for the draft. If you are 18 and you are a male, you have filed with selective service. Unless there's something physically or mentally wrong with you. Which is why, Brent is not. So what happens is, when this happens, you have a database in which the government will go and they will pull you from when and if a draft is necessary. That's how it is today. How it was then is that when it was passed, it was mandatory that you would go in and be trained for 21 months. You would give 21 months of service to the military, and you would be trained during that time period. Therefore, we, during the Cold War, would have a pool of people that we could draw from to go and defend us at a moment's notice, if necessary. It's kind of like the old militia movement, but actually now organized. Now, just like after World War I, we came back and there was a Red Scare because of the Bolshevik Revolution, there is another Red Scare, the second Red Scare, when we come back from World War II. And this is the one that you are probably more familiar with because it involved Joseph McCarthy. The second Red Scare really takes prominence when Truman in 1947 orders all federal employees be investigated to make sure they were not secret communist sympathizers. He cast a very broad net, and what he comes up with was a very small group of people who are actually going to be brought up on charges. The major one that we'll talk about is a man by the name of Alger Hiss. He is brought up, he's interrogated for being a communist. He swears under affidavit that he is not a communist, only to have evidence brought against him that proves he had ties with communist groups. Therefore, he is tried and convicted for perjury. He would go to jail for 3.5 years of a 5-year sentence. These are the biggest fish they catch in the federal government. Now, what makes all these matters worse is that a senator from Wisconsin, Joseph Raymond McCarthy, is going to come to prominence between 1950 and 1954, making a whole series of claims in which members of the community, members of the federal government, are labeled to be communists. He swears he has this list, and it has people's names on them that are secret communist sympathizers. History has shown that many of these people that he railed against were, in fact, members of a communist party or had communist leaning. However, the manner in which he did it was very sensationalistic. As a result, eventually it would result in him being censured by Congress and sent home. What censures means is it's the highest punishment Congress can give, other than being held, you can't impeach yourself. You can't impeach a member of Congress. Being held in contempt of Congress for giving false testimony, like what they're looking at with Roger Clemens. Yes, remember Senate, and they censure him. It's the highest thing that they can do against one of their own. Okay, if you've been paying attention to the news, Roger Clemens is undergoing a trial to see if he provided false testimony to Congress, which could result in him being sent to jail for contempt of Congress. It depends on how many charges they go for. Now, this brings us up to the SS Grand Camp, the Texas City explosion. This is the greatest non-wartime disaster in the United States. One of the things I like teaching about this class, especially as we get closer to the present, is that you may start having personal connection with some of these events, and this one I do. Both my mother's family and my father's family were there at Texas City when this exploded. In 1947, the major port in Texas was Texas City. Prior to Texas City becoming the major port, it was Galveston. Galveston was destroyed in the 1900 flood, and the ports moved inland. How many of you guys have ever gone fishing off the Texas Dike in Texas City? Okay, Sam has. So, like 5 miles? Really, really long. The reason it's so long is because it protects the ship channel, the Houston Ship Channel, where shipping has now moved to. Well, why did it move to Houston? Houston because of the Grand Camp explosion. The Grand Camp was one of hundreds of Liberty ships which were thrown together during the Second World War, in which we just needed ships that were strong enough and utilitarian enough to get from the United States to the war zone and back and drop off goods. After the war was over, we had all these excess ships that we did not need. As a result, we had a tendency to give them away or sell them at rock bottom prices. The Grand Camp is an example of one that gave away to France. It was under French registry. On the morning of April 16th, 1947, the Grand Camp was being loaded at Texas City with ammonium nitrate. What's ammonium nitrate? No farmers in here? Maybe. What? Fertilizer. It's fertilizer. It's being loaded with fertilizer. The men who take it from the shore to placing it on the ship are called longshoremen. And it was a quite normal occurrence for you to see these longshoremen smoking while they were loading the ships. We don't know exactly how the fire on the Grand Camp started, although we do know that it is reported around 7 or so in the morning as it's being loaded that green smoke was coming from one of her holding bays. The captain, doing what all captains are supposed to do at this time, orders everybody off the ship and battens down the hatches and activates the fire suppression system. Problem is, the fire suppression system doesn't use water, it uses steam. As soon as they battened down the hatches, they made the hull almost airtight as you could possibly make it. How many guys have ever seen your parents use a pressure cooker? Anyone ever seen your parents use a pressure cooker? What is it?
It's like, it's a pot that the top completely seals.
That's right.
It's like steam.
And it steams it inside. If you take it, and there's different types. There's some that you put on and you twist the top on, and it make it very, very tight. There's others, like my father-in-law has an old one that he used when he was at Boy Scouts. That's cast iron that has bolts on it. You actually ratchet down. And what happens is you use pressure to cook it. And so if it's something very, very hard, the pressure pretty much just makes it tender. Well, so much pressure is built up in these pressure cookers, especially like the one my mom has, where it has this little like bob on the top. It's got a little steam area that when it gets done, it'll bob back and forth and it'll whistle. Okay, if you've ever seen one like that, it's probably one of the most common types. And you know that you got to take it off pretty quick once it starts doing that because the pressure is getting pretty great in it. If you don't take it off, keep it under there, what will happen is the pressure will build up and the lid will pop off, and that would probably be the nicest thing that happened. When we moved into our house, there was this nice stain on the 10-foot ceiling there, and we're like, how the heck did that get there in the kitchen? And what happened is we discovered is the people who lived in the house before we did had a pressure cooker that they didn't take it off at the time, and it went pop, hit the ceiling 10 feet up in the air. So it was their color today. It was a different type of paint. So what happened on the Grand Camp is they have turned it into the world's largest pressure boiler, pressure cooker. Pressure is increasing, and as the pressure increases, more of this smoke comes out. If you've ever seen ammonium nitrate burn, if you've ever seen fertilizer burn, it is beautiful colors. It's red, it's green, it's blue smoke, and it was coming up. So people, not realizing what they were doing, flocked to the waters to watch this, watch people trying to put this out, see what's going to come next. And there were hundreds of people around the dock. Then, at 9:12 a.m., it exploded. Planes that had flown in from Houston to see these really neat pictures, the a crew that was with a news organization were taking videos of it, are batted from the sky. They die instantly. 500 people cease to exist in the first explosion. 1,000 buildings are razed, completely devastated. Ships all around the Texas City port are damaged, one of which is the SS Highflyer, which starts to take water. They discover her to be, later in the day, they discover her to be on fire as well. And they call for a tugboat to come and move her out into open water. So when she explodes, the devastation won't be so great. When they finally get there and start moving her out to sea, it's close to night. At midnight, she explodes as well. The death toll is 541. About 5,000 are injured. Many just cease to exist and are still unaccounted for. One woman had sent her husband to work that day with some socks that had run out of their elastic. The elastic had broken in their socks. She had given him rubber bands to keep his socks up for the day. That was how she identified the remains of her husband, because there were rubber bands on his socks, and there was nothing else distinguishable about it. Both my sets of grandparents lived in Texas City. Both sets of grandparents worked at an oil refinery. Luckily for me, they lived far enough out that they were not affected by the explosion. The plant that they were loading the fertilizer from, the Monsanto plant, was right next to the dock. If you go to Texas City today, you will notice that there's a whole bunch of old buildings that nobody uses right next to the waterfront. And all the newer development is further out from the water line. That's because nobody wants to live there. When the Grand Camp goes up, her 2-ton anchor is thrown 2.5 miles to where it sits today at the entrance. Have you seen it?
Right at the beginning of the...
Right at the beginning of the Texas City dive, 2 miles away. I remember being a kid and going up, my grandfather telling me this story, and I looked over to the side, and there was like a huge rut that just somehow it had been there, and I always just assumed that that rut was, kind of like Superman's ship crashed to Earth, leaving up this huge crater. That's not how it was. It was thrown in the air. If you go to the Monsanto plant entrance, it's still there today, the propeller of the Grand Camp is at their entrance, where it landed. Worst non-wartime disaster in American history. When the Grand Camp exploded, the pressure wave was felt as far as Houston. Windows shattered in skyscrapers in Houston. My father's house had a chimney. The chimney was broken because of this and rendered unusable. My grandmother packed up her children and took them from Texas City down into Lamar, a good another 10, 15 miles away, staying with a friend. They did not know what happened to either one of my grandfathers until later in the day. Now, in 1948, FDR's fourth term comes to an end. Why do I say FDR's fourth term? Because he had died, but he had won a fourth term. Truman was serving that fourth term. In this fourth term, Truman is now going to run for his own term. He is nominated by the Democrats to seek his own term, and the Republicans nominate Thomas Dewey. Hands-on favorite to win is Thomas Dewey. There is no doubt he is going to win. People are tired of Democrats. Democrats have been in the White House since 1933, and nobody wants them there. To make matters worse, Truman has taken a lot of backlash from his investigation into all the federal workers. Coupled with that, the Democrat Party actually splinters. It becomes two parties, the Democrats and the Dixiecrats. The Dixiecrats are made up of old Civil War Confederate states who do not like the direction that FDR had taken the Democrat Party by bringing in African Americans. They didn't want African Americans in their party. So they split, and they run Strom Thurmond, the governor of South Carolina. In this election, now we've looked at split parties before, many times. Many times. And every time a party splits off, what happens? They split the vote, and they don't win. So that is the general assumption here. Everyone says that the Republicans are going to win. There is no doubt about it. In fact, it comes down to the leading literary journal of the day, the Literary Digest, does a scientific poll that shows, without a doubt, that come Election Day, Truman will be defeated. They publish this in their magazine. It's like Time coming out and saying, Truman defeated, 2 weeks beforehand. Okay? Time comes out and says, Obama defeated 2 weeks before. Nobody's even voted yet. Kind of presumptuous, right? But the data was so far along that this is what was going to happen that there was no doubt that was going to happen. Then Election Day comes, and guess what? Truman wins. It even went so far that the Chicago Daily Tribune published newspapers that said Dewey defeats Truman. And this epic picture was taken in which Truman is showing up this sign, showing this newspaper that says that he has been defeated on the day he was victorious. Now, the closest thing that we have in comparison to that would be the 2000 election, in which President Bush eventually defeats Al Gore. But for those of you that don't remember, at the beginning, it was originally called For Bush. And there was a huge party at the Capitol in which people from all over Texas were gathered around. And they were just having a good time. And then they announced that Bush won the presidency. And the Austin American Statesman gives out all these pre-printed papers that say Bush defeats Gore. And gives them out to everybody free of charge as commemorative paper. Well, then what happens? Then they call Florida back and say, whoa, no, Florida is still in play. We don't know what's going on there. So what happens, and I had a student who had gone down there, he was in my state government class at the time, had gone down there and he was partying, and I can still see him today. He came back the next day, and he has this huge black eye. I was like, what the heck happened to you? He said, well, I was down there in Austin, I was having a good time, they gave us these papers, and I had one. And I was, we're all rejoicing, yeah, Bush won. And all of a sudden they come back and say, I got to have that paper. I said, what do you mean you got to have that paper? You got to have that paper. They just called it back. Bush hasn't won yet, so we can't give that to you. We don't want to have a situation like this emerging. So my student refused to give it to him. So the guy who was asking nicely hit him, knocked him down, and stole his paper. So now that Truman is into his own term, and the New Deal has run its course, and World War II is over, we are now going to see Truman's domestic policy. He continued on FDR's during his term, and now that he's got his own term, he's going to introduce his own policy, and this is known as the Fair Deal. And this is the last of the deals. We had the Square Deal with Theodore Roosevelt. We had the New Deal with FDR, and now we have the Fair Deal. And the first thing here is the Housing Act of 1949. The Housing Act of 1949 would provide from 1953, when it is first funded, to 1986, when it goes away, provide over $13 billion to go in, clean up tenements, slums, and build new houses, new housing developments. for people of lower income to live in. This is not the projects that everybody knows about. That will come under LBJ. This is tearing it down and providing new places for people to live. It's not owned by the government. It's still owned by other people, but they are going to get assisted here. Next. Okay, well, first of all, I like this picture. Just found this picture a few minutes ago. This is what we would think of as a tenement dwelling, right? Whole bunch of people living in a real ratty, nasty place. The first thing that should give it away that it's not from that era is that it's what? It's a color picture. This is a picture from Detroit last year. Detroit is one of the worst places to live right now, and that's a good example of it. So, in 1950, in addition to that, Congress is also going to extend the Social Security numbers. It's going to add 10 million more people that apply or that can be sent to receive Social Security. Now, remember, Social Security was originally passed in the New Deal as a way to keep people from dying when they had no jobs, right? And it was a temporary measure. The problem is, anytime that people get money for not much, that's going to become a permanent thing. Is Social Security still there today? When Christina is working at her job and she gets her paycheck and she looks at all the money that comes out of it, there's a section on it that says Social Security, yes? And that money is what? Money that comes out and it goes into an account that has your name on it, so when you retire, you'll reap the benefits of it, yes? No. No. No, no, no. You're paying for my in-laws' parents who are on Social Security. That money doesn't go into any account. It goes to pay for people who are currently retired. And you hope that the people that come after you will pay for it. Melissa's laughing because she knows darn well that there's not going to be any Social Security by the time that you guys get ready to retire. Don't expect Social Security to take care of you because it's a giant Ponzi scheme. If it wasn't the government doing it, the people doing it would be in jail because it's illegal for public entities, private entities to do it. Government can because, you don't have to print more money to fund it. And the best part about this, woohoo, is the next one is the Minimum Wage Act, in which minimum wage almost doubles. It goes 40 cents to 70 cents. Man, we're going to make it rain like Lil Wayne up in here.
Make it snow.
Right? We're going to make it rain. Woo! 70 cents. What can you buy with 70 cents an hour? It's a lot of things. Those comic books were like 10 cents a time. Gas is like a quarter. But what happens? This is the thing that people don't want you to know about. This is economics, pure and simple. This is government, pure and simple. What happens when minimum wage goes from 40 to 70 cents? You get paid more, right? But then guess what else you find out?
Everything raises in price 30 cents.
Everything that goes up with prices. When I started working at Walmart in 1991, my senior year in high school, I got paid $4.05 an hour. That was minimum wage. And I could work 2.5 hours and afford a CD. I can go buy Vanilla Ice. Ice Ice Baby. Yeah. All right. And yes, I did.
Okay.
You got to remember, I'm a child of the 90s, early 90s. I went to see them in concert. Okay, that's how bad it is. All right. I told you my Eagle Guard secret. Okay? I'm going to do my 20th reunion in June. And I promise you, they will play. As soon as first people at my high school go here, dun, 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 every head in my graduating class will turn to me. I didn't have the eyebrows shaved, but I did have dyed blonde hair. Anyhow, moving on. So what happens is I could work for 2.5 hours, and I could buy a CD. Now, I know you don't buy CDs anymore, but you go on iTunes, and how much do they cost for a full CD? $13, $14 maybe. If they're on sale, what, 10? Okay? I remember in 2003, right when Napster was big, okay, when Napster was humongous, you walked into a record company, a record store, and yes, they did have them back then. And a CD was like $18. But at that same time, when I left, I was being paid $7.25 an hour. Minimum wage had risen to $6, and the CD was going for $18. Why? Because Walmart had to pay us more. Because they were paying me more, they had to charge you, the consumer, more. So this is just a giant circular deal right here. They raise it, prices go up. And they raise it again, prices go up. Whenever you hear somebody say a minimum wage, a living wage, they don't understand the whole scope of the issue here. Because if we charge you $10, if you get paid $10 an hour minimum wage, prices are going to go up substantially. We'll talk more about that when we get a little further, because prices are really going to go up. Now, my whole frame of reference from when I was a kid, my first experience with money was action figures, was Star Wars toys. And it just floors me how much they're going for these days, because, I've got little kids and they buy Star Wars toys too. And they're like, I remember I bought one for 99 cents. In 78 probably. That was my first use of my allowance. And they're going for $8 these days. And they've gotten small. Also think about it, because the purchasing power of the dollar has shrunk 85 cents in that same time. Where is Korea? The map, not I don't want any smart aleck telling me, don't try. All right, so now let's talk about Korea. We've talked about Korea off and on throughout the course of the semester. We talked about it in regards to the First Sino-Japanese War. We talked about it with the Root Takahira Agreement. We talked about it in regards to the Taft Memorandum. We talked about it with the Cairo Declaration after World War II, in which what was going to happen at the end of it. Remember, they agreed that China would be free and independent. We talked about it after the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, because all of a sudden, Russia wanted to get in while the getting's still good, and banged and rolled the Japanese all the way down to the south. So what happens is when the war is over, Stalin refuses to leave. And we're like, hey, we signed an agreement. Declaration of Cairo says that you're going to do this. That we're going to do this. And Stalin says, I didn't sign no document there. I wasn't there. It was you, Chiang Kai-shek, FDR, and Churchill. No, I wasn't there. I didn't agree to any such thing. This is ours. Well, the UN gets involved, and they negotiate a division between Korea, between North People's Republic of Korea. Anytime I say the phrase, I use the word people in anything for the rest of the semester, you should think what type of government, capitalist or communist?
Communist.
Communist, good. And then the Republic of Korea, which is capitalist, free nation, down here. And it divides it up at the 38th parallel right here. Okay? Now, that leads us to the Secretary of State, Dean Acheson, in 1950, giving a speech in which he outlines the United States policy in regards to Southeast Asia. In this speech, he says that the United States' focus of interest is in the Philippines, it is in Japan, and it is, they're concerned with Taiwan. But what they do not talk about is Korea. Korea is not mentioned, it is purposely left out, even though it is a UN protectorate. The reason being is because the United States doesn't want to come here and fight. Why? Because it's a whole mess of fail. It's a little appendage off of China in which forces would have to come in and land and then go north. We don't want to do that. It's better to go with the whole isolationist policy that we've had since the dawn of time, keep water between us and the bad guys. And that's what we want to do. Now, what he's thinking, but it hasn't been enunciated yet, will come under Eisenhower as a policy known as the containment doctrine, the containment theory. But don't write that down now. That's just foreshadowing. I will tell you about it when it comes time for that. So, Acheson gives this speech in which he says the United States has no strategic interest in protecting Korea. He doesn't say it particularly specifically that way, but it is inferred. And because it is inferred, the Russians say, they're not going to do anything to stop us. So the Russians, under Russians supplying North Korea, under Kim Jong-il was the son. Kim Jong-un is the grandson. Kim Jong, can't remember his first name, but basically the first leader of the People's Republic of China, of Korea, who is set up by Stalin himself, is given permission to invade and drive south. And as you can see from this graphic here, you'll see in a second it's going to start again. Because you have a lot of stuff changing here. Is from the beginning in 1950, they drive all the way down, and the only area that the United States forces are still left is right here off the port of Busan. That occurs June 25th, 1950. Enter the picture Douglas MacArthur. 5-star general, got his 5th star in 44, is given command of UN forces to go in, invade, and take back Korea. Now what he does is brilliant. He doesn't invade where you would think he would. You think he would go to where the forces are beleaguered. Oops. Oh, that's right. You think he'd go where the forces are beleaguered, but he doesn't. What he does is he strikes above the 38th parallel at Incheon, which is below. It's right below. Right here. But he cuts off the supply line for the Korean Communist forces. And as a result, launches a brilliant assault and takes Seoul, which is the capital of South Korea, but had been captured by the North Korean forces. So the UN forces land at Incheon. Now, what happens is from there, he proceeds to push the forces back up north. And as he gets further and further north, he is told by Truman to stop pushing them. Push them back to the 38th, and that's it. Push them back, keep pushing them back. And MacArthur refuses. MacArthur says, no, we have them on the run. The North Koreans are pathetic creatures. They cannot stand against us. We are going to defeat them and free Korea. Now, as he continues to get further up towards the Yalu River, which is the border between China and North Korea, you have China becoming more and more concerned that they're going to cross into China. And he refused and start issuing these nasty letters and directives to come no further, or else China will respond. Well, when he is continues getting closer and closer up, his forces get to a spot where they're going to break. They're going to split. He divides his forces. If you know anything about military, do not divide your forces, because they need it to go around. They need to do it to go around some mountain. As a result of not abiding by Truman's orders, he is told. MacArthur is told to come to Washington. He comes to Washington. And Truman says, what are you doing? You're not doing what I'm saying. You need to do how I'm ordering you. And he says, listen, we've got them on the run. We are going to beat them. If China gets involved, we'll go after them too. So we need to pursue these guys into China. We need to go and actually defeat them. And what will happen is if we need to actually go and drop nukes on them, well, then that's what we need to do. So as he's pushing further, he goes back, and remember, these guys are completely pathetic. There's no way they can do anything. The Koreans, they can't stop. As they continue getting closer to that river, the Yalu River, prisoners of war start going from being Korean to Chinese. And when he divides his forces, he is attacked by Chinese forces, the Chinese 23rd Battalion that was hiding in those mountains. And what occurred is they pushed the Americans all the way south. Now, MacArthur says, give me the nuke, give me the nuke. We're going to drop nukes on them. We're going to drop them. We're going to nuke them off the face of the planet. Truman says, no, we're not going to do it. We're not going to use nukes. I've already ordered 2 being dropped and never going to do it again. He says, you need to do it. If you don't do it, I'm going to find someone who will. MacArthur says it. And Truman said, I don't think so. MacArthur then goes and starts campaigning and lobbying in Congress behind Truman's back to get permission to use every weapon the United States has in its arsenal to go after him. This would have started World War III. Truman calls MacArthur into his office and tells him, you're fired. Because of MacArthur, because of his actions, we do not have 5-star generals anymore. We do not have 5-star admirals, 5-star nothing. We do not have that position anymore. The highest you get in our military is 4-star. That's it. In 1951, the United States goes to meet with communist Koreans, and they sign an armistice. This armistice would go into effect finally after 2 years of negotiations in 1953 when Eisenhower becomes president. But today, this armistice still holds. Korea, North and South, are still technically at war. The United States never declared war against Korea. It was a police action. The armistice goes into effect in 1953. What, Sam?
The armistice was signed by who?
The People's Republic of Korea and the United Nations. The war comes to an end. Now today, if you've been paying attention to the news in the last couple of weeks, President Obama went out to South Korea, where he went to the demilitarized zone. At the DMZ, it is truly no man's land. I want to say it's around 2 miles wide, and it runs the length of the entire peninsula. It is the most heavily armored area on the face of the earth. There are more weapons, more men, more landmines in that area or facing that area than anywhere else in the world. Okay. Eventually, the armistice does return to the 38th parallel, where the war ends there. Now, we're going to start shifting with Eisenhower throughout the rest of the semester. We're going to basically deal with things thematically. We're not going to follow necessarily chronologically. Like a good example is we're not going to talk about the Civil Rights era during this time period because it does occur in the 50s, but it's more germane to the 60s. We'll talk about that as a lump sum next Tuesday. But we're going to talk about the birth of the Cold War at this time. In 1952, Dwight D. Eisenhower becomes the Republican candidate for president. Truman had wanted to run for another term, but because of some of his actions that he had taken in the States, because of the Korean War debacle, he is not very popular. When he leaves, he's one of our least popular presidents. The interesting thing about that is that since then, his image has really been rehabilitated, and he is considered one of the greatest presidents of the century. Which goes to show that you can't judge a president immediately after he's been president, whether he's a success or a failure. sometimes it holds out. I really doubt anybody's going to write any glowing reviews of Jimmy Carter. I really don't think so. Still, we're 30 some odd years out from his administration, and he's still considered a failure as a president. Eisenhower is going to run 52 and serve 53 through 57, runs for a second term, and is 57 through 61. Under him, the Cold War really escalates. The Cold War really takes off. And a lot of that is due to some of the policies of his Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles. And one of the major issues that Dulles pursues as Secretary of State, is the concept of brinksmanship. Brinksmanship. All right. And basically what the brinksmanship is kind of like a game of dare. Right? You and your buddy are standing on a 1,000-foot cliff at the edge of it, precipice. And you say to your buddy, hey, I dare you to stand right there. Okay, all right. And your buddy just says, I dare you to stand right there. Okay, so you stand right there. And you're getting closer and closer to the brink. How close will you get to the brink and not fall over? Now, the analogy holds because the brink is certain death. The brink here is nuclear war, which also would be certain death. But to get our way, we basically say to the Russians, how far are you willing to go to pursue your claim? Are you willing to risk nuclear war? And basically pursue it to that point. Eventually, this policy is going to win the Cold War in favor of the United States because it involves bigger and more and stronger weapons that we can build because our economy is a free market, a capitalist one versus the communist one, which doesn't have the same benefits. And they are going to spin themselves into complete and utter ruin that they're still trying to get out of today. Now, why is this such an issue? Well, it's such an issue because, as I kind of alluded to, when Truman tells Stalin that the United States has a bomb of immense power, he says, we better use it on Japan then. It wasn't very surprised. You know why? Because he had spies in the Manhattan Project. He knew exactly what we were doing, and he knew how far we were. In fact, after the war is over, his spies steal our plan. And then, in 1949, Russia detonates the first atomic bomb. Their first atomic bomb, which is the equivalent of the same bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. Then, 2 years later, the United States detonates the first hydrogen bomb. First hydrogen bomb is 10 times the effectiveness than the A bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. And this basically creates escalation. Okay? Well, we've got a bigger one than you do, we've got a bigger one than you do, we've got a bigger one than you do, we've got a bigger one than you do. The problem here, though, still at this time, the manner in which any bomb would be delivered has to be by a plane or a jet. One of the workhorses of our military still today is the B-52. B-52 Stratofortress. Going to be instrumental during Vietnam. And it is designed to deliver nuclear payloads for this express purpose. Now, the policy that we would pursue under brinksmanship is known as MAD because it is mutually assisted destruction. Mutually assisted destruction. You hurt us, we'll hurt you more. Okay? You drop a nuke on us, we'll drop 2 nukes on you. You drop 2 nukes on us, we'll drop 5 on you. Both sides are going to lose, but I promise you, we will make you hurt more. Now, in addition to brinksmanship and mutually assured destruction, you also have what comes out about during his administration as the policy of containment. And the policy of containment is trying to control where communism spreads and kind of isolating itself. ever heard somebody have to be put into quarantine? They've got the mumps. You know, you guys all next semester before you come back to Blinn, you all have to have meningitis shots because a student at A&M last year caught meningitis and died. And so a bill was put through that all of you have to have meningitis shots before you come back. And what happens if somebody catches meningitis, because it is very contagious, is they will quarantine you and they will put you somewhere so that only you are contaminated. Right? Because you are contained in a select area. Well, communism is no different than meningitis because it leads to death. And what happens here is we enact this policy of containment in which we are going to try to control where it spreads. Remember, this goes hand in hand with the domino theory that we talked about last time, where communism is in one nation, it will spread to another nation. At this time period, in the Soviet Union, it is communism. It spread from here to Romania, to Bulgaria, to Hungary, to Poland, because they forced it on everyone. And then China fell as well to communism. The fear is that after China, it'll go India, and after China, then Japan. So we're going to try to contain those areas. And if we can contain it and protect those areas, then it won't spread. Policy of containment. And that's what we're going to talk about the rest of the class. In 1954, the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, SEATO, is created. 1954, SEATO is created. SEATO is created. And what SEATO does is it is the Southeast Asia equivalent to NATO. In it, members agree that if one is attacked, the others will come to their aid to protect them and declare war on the others. This included Australia, France, New Zealand, Pakistan, the Philippines, the Republic of China, which we know today as Taiwan, Thailand, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Now, basically, the important parts there of SEATO are here, here, and here, because they are also NATO assaults. So if somebody here, China, attacks Taiwan, the United States will go to war against China. Sound like World War I to anybody? Which would bring in all the NATO alliances as well. Bring all those in. So now we have a pretty much of a border here that is being created. Okay? The Southeast Asia Treaty Organization does that. Now, 1955, May 14th, 1955, Russia enforces the Warsaw Pact on its Eastern European neighbors. Now, obviously, you're saying, wait a minute, that's to the west of Russia. Why is it Eastern Europe? Because Europe is here, and this is considered Eastern Europe. You have Poland, you have East Germany, you have Hungary, you have Bulgaria, Romania. All of these join with Russia. The important thing you need to know about the Warsaw Pact is it is the equivalent to NATO, but also keep in mind, members of NATO asked to be members. Members of the Warsaw Pact forced to be members. Members of the Warsaw Pact were forced to be members. Now, continuing the policy of the Cold War escalation in this time period. In 1956, a crisis is going to develop over England's control of the Suez Canal. Now remember, England controlled the Suez Canal, but it was free to navigate. Anyone could use it. In 1956, a humongous dam that was a hydroelectric dam was going to be built on the Nile. It was financed, it was built, it was supposed to be built by the United States. and it was going to be Egypt. Well, Egypt in 1956 recognizes China, the Communist People's Republic of China, and its right to exist. By doing so, it violates United States policy of assisting nations that recognize communist entities. As a result, they lose that deal. Egypt retaliates by launching a strike into the Suez Canal, which is right here on its east border, and taking it over, and refusing to allow people to go through it. France, Egypt, and France, Italy, and England launch an assault to take it back, but it goes horrendously. It is an embarrassment to England, to all those nations, and of course, England, the United States, very good friends. We're allies still. At the time this is going on, Hungary rebels against its communist oppressors. The Soviet Union puts down this rebellion very bloodily. 10,000 people are slaughtered in the streets. The United States tries to protest in the United Nations, but finds that their hands are really tied because how can they put down this rebellion versus what their good friend England is doing in Egypt at the same time? So it kind of backfires on us. That same year, 1956, the face of nuclear warfare is changed forever. Remember how I just told you a few moments ago that the only way that a bomb could be dropped, a nuclear bomb could be dropped in another nation, is by putting it in a plane and it going across the ocean and dropping it. That is changed. 56, the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile is introduced, the ICBM. ICBMs allow you to put a nuclear warhead on the tip of a rocket, fire it into low Earth orbit, and send it back down anywhere in the world. No longer are jets or planes needed to deliver missiles. Human life involvement ends at the push of a button. This completely changes modern warfare. Russia responds in 1957 with the first artificial satellite, Sputnik. The artist's rendition of it right here. If you've ever seen the movie WALL-E, there's a scene when WALL-E is leaving the Earth. My kids see it all the time. They're like, "Oh, the Sputnik!" I don't think it's still up there, though. But as he's leaving Earth and he's on the little ship, and then you can see his little ball with 4 antennas sticking off of it get batted out of the way. Sputnik, the first artificial satellite. Basically, all it was a radio transmitter that beamed signals back down to Earth. But the fact that the Russians did it, and they did it before us, and did something that we believe they did not have the technology to do, scared the crud out of the United States. Because now, if they can put a satellite up there, they can put a weapon up there. If they can put a weapon up there, there's nothing we can do about it. So this now starts the space race. If we could go back in time, I would love to go back in time to the guy who started it, who introduced the Teller Amendment, who said after the Spanish-American War, people were going to be free and independent, and say, you really don't want to do that. You really don't want to do that. Of course, then you have to tell them why, and then who knows what would the world come to cease to exist. In the 50s, Cuba was the Las Vegas of the Caribbean. Where he went to gamble, it's where he went to have a good time, it's where he went to party, it's where everybody went for the fun of it. It was the #1 destination stop in the United States for the high rollers. The United States owned humongous gambling casinos, they owned hotels, name it. It was under the command, Cuba was under the leadership of a president Fulgencio Batista. However, he was getting old, and he was very, 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 won't say evil. We'll say wicked. How about that? Dictator. He was a very, very brutal dictator. He oppressed his people, and until they could take no more. They rallied around a individual by the name of Dr. Fidel Castro, and Castro and his revolutionaries are successful in defeating Batista. They established their own government. Now, when you think of Castro today, you think of the communist Castro. Well, he wasn't a communist at first. What happens is he gets on a plane and he flies to Washington, D.C. When he flies to Washington, D.C., he goes to the White House. When he goes to the White House, he tries to request a meeting with President Eisenhower. Unfortunately, Eisenhower is on the West Coast playing golf. When he's told that Castro is there, he says, let Nixon handle it. Let Nixon handle the meeting. Now, who is this Nixon guy we talk about? Well, we're going to talk about him quite a bit for the remainder of the semester. Richard Milhous Nixon is the vice president to Eisenhower. He is the political pro, if you will, who has political experience and knows how to get things done in Washington. Eisenhower, being a military man and never holding an elected position in his life, is not suited for that type of thing. As a result, to balance the ticket, Nixon gets made VP. Now, the irony here is even if Eisenhower was there in the White House when Castro showed up, Nixon probably still would have been in on the meeting. But because of Castro being insulted when Eisenhower would not meet with him, and he meeting with the number 2 guy, number 1 meeting with the number 2 is kind of a slap in the face, he refuses to meet with him and flies back to Cuba. There, when he gets to Cuba, he receives a telegram from the new Soviet premier, Stalin has died, and the new Soviet premier, Nikita Khrushchev, sends a letter of introduction congratulating him on his revolution and would like to offer his support for anything that he can do to help Castro secure his footing in Cuba. As a result, the old adage, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, comes into effect, and Castro eventually becomes communist because the communists were willing to meet with him on an equal playing field instead of insulting him as he had been. We'll talk more about that as we get closer. Now, during the last 50 years, there's a whole bunch of things that have been major problems for the United States. One of them is Cuba. Another one of them is the Middle East. And the Middle East problems can be traced back to the breakup of the Ottoman Empire. You will remember from the First World War, Turkey, then known as the Ottoman Empire, a remnant of a Muslim empire that has stretched all the way back to the Crusades, was considered the old man of Europe. It was falling apart, it wasn't very effective, and it was slowly dying. World War I kills it off. Part of the Treaty of Versailles was the establishment in parts of the Ottoman Empire that no longer exist of protectorates, zones that were not going to be colonized, but were going to be protected for a period of years by England and France. One of these areas that was protected by England was known as Palestine. Palestine, however you want to say it. Chase Palestine. Palestine. Great Britain. Palestine had historically been, thousands of years ago, the Jewish capital of Israel. Its capital, Jerusalem. For people of the Jewish faith, it was a land given to them by God. Through whole bunches of situations, they lose it. After World War II, there is still a sizable Jewish population in that area, but they are outnumbered by Arabs. After World War II, the people of Jewish faith start flocking back to this area and start asking England to establish a nation for them so that something like the Holocaust could not happen again. On May 14th, 1948, England's protectorate over the Palestine area ends. That same day, Israel is declared a new Jewish nation by the Jewish people in the area. As soon as they do this, war is declared upon them by their surrounding Arab nations. Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. You see, they wanted to create their own nation out of this area that would be an Arab nation because Arabs were in the majority. The War of Independence for Israel would go on until May 11th, 1949, when a truce was enacted. It would last to 1949, in which a truce was enacted. Now, why do I talk about this? Why do I talk about Israel at this moment? What is the point? For what purpose is there? The purpose is that I am laying the foundation for the end of the 20th century. So we can see these events that will lead us up to where we are today in Afghanistan, with possible intervention coming in the near future into Syria, with the issues with Lebanon, with the issues of Iraq. All those situations go back to this time period. The United States supported Israel, still supports Israel today. Now please don't understand, I am not saying in any way that what occurred on September 11th, 2001 was something we deserved. Absolutely not. But what I'm saying is that for September 11th, 2001, many people's eyes were opened about why the Arab people may not like the United States. Those of Muslim beliefs may not like the United States. And it just came as quite a shock to them. Well, it shouldn't if you're a good student of history, because you know that we have been involved in these areas for 70 years. Now, at the end of his administration, Eisenhower is going to issue the Eisenhower Doctrine, which is kind of an extension, an escalation itself of the Truman Doctrine. And you will remember when we talked last Thursday, the Truman Doctrine basically said that the United States would provide money and military assistance, equipment, supplies, no men, to nations that were fighting communism. And it was addressed specifically to Greece because they were fighting a civil war. And the rebels were backed by the communists. The Eisenhower Doctrine is going to change that. Now, the Eisenhower Doctrine says we will provide financial and military aid to nations fighting communists, and if necessary, we will provide soldiers, boots on the ground, go in and help these nations survive communist attacks. Now, acting on this doctrine, Secretary of State Dulles is going to be able to create the Middle East Treaty Organization, MITO. Middle East Treaty Organization. It is made up of Turkey, Iraq. You're going to laugh when I say these names. Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Pakistan. Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan. Now, why is that so humorous? I said Afghanistan, Pakistan, I'm sorry, got the wrong stand. Why are those so humorous? Pakistan doesn't like us. They were holding bin Laden. Iran sure doesn't like us. And we've been to war twice in Iraq. Turkey likes us, though. That's good to know. But the important thing with MITO is that it successfully links NATO and CETO. Because in MITO, Great Britain is a member. And Great Britain is also a member with who? NATO and SEATO. Okay? Turkey is a member of NATO and a member of METO. So what has happened now with, actually, I'm not doing it right. I need to draw through. The containment theory, containment policy, once completed, looks like this, where we have treaties of alliance all the way around communist countries. One communist country we haven't talked about, we'll spend a little bit about talking the next couple of days, is right there. What's it called? Vietnam. Now, this comes into effect just in time because in 1958, the United Arab Republic is created, and this is an organization of communist forces under Egypt and Syria, backed by Russia. The UAR is determined to establish Arab nations that are communist. They invade in late 1958, they invade Iraq, kill the king, and kill his son, the crown prince, and the premier. They then establish their own government. Fearing that a similar situation would happen to them, the Muslim nation of Lebanon requests aid under the Eisenhower Doctrine. Ike responds by sending in 5,000 Marines. All right, take your pen, draw a line. Exam 4 ends here.